We all know of countless stories of games stuck in development hell. Most of the time, the end product can severely suffer for a variety of reasons, such as changing developers, changing engines, or maybe just losing the core vision over such a long period of time. Getting a poor product at the end of the tunnel is probably less common than all the games that just never make it out. The countless games behind the scenes that just never saw the light of day. What's probably the least common ending of development hell is the game making it out the other side unscathed to deliver a fun and enjoyable experience. And I'm so glad that I can say that this is totally what happened with 2006's Prey. Yes, 2006's Prey. I need to put the year in front of the title to properly identify it because the 2017 reboot did that thing where they used the exact same name, which makes trying to search for videos on this game kind of annoying, as well as distinguishing it in my Steam library being a small project. And though 2006 was the year that this game ended up releasing, it was first announced back in 1995. Intended to be more than just a game, it was a tech showcase developed on an in-house engine at the studio originally developing this title, 3D Realms. This early build of the game got shown back in 1997 and 1998 during E3, and there was even a playable demo at private press meetings at said events. Reception of the early playable demo and footage was positive, and by the standards of the time, the game was technically very impressive. One of the game's marquee features was to be portals, not unlike the ones found in Valve's 2007 puzzle platformer. Rips that appeared throughout the game world would allow you to peer through and venture into other areas of the map. This feat proved to be very technically demanding with the tools available at the time, and the difficulty that rendering these portals brought is commonly attributed to be one of the reasons that the game struggled so much throughout its development. Head engineer of the game, William Scarborough, made a post on an internet forum in 1999 stating, "In hindsight, portal tricks such as this should be used as tricks, not an engine paradigm." 3D Realms' development of the game slowed to a crawl over the years, though it was never formally cancelled. A few years later in 2001 saw a big change in how the developers ended up approaching this title. After being impressed with id Software's id Tech 4 game engine, 3D Realms decided to utilize a license for this engine rather than developing an engine in-house. In fact, the game itself was no longer being developed in-house. Developer of the PC hit Rune, Human Head Studios, was commissioned to create this new iteration of Prey. All previous work was just used as a starting point. Human Head quietly chipped away on the game until it was announced in 2005 and released a year later in 2006. Funnily enough, weird technical problems didn't end at the game's launch. Prey is notorious for launching on a Steam competitor at the time called Triton. The reason you've never heard of it is because, it didn't do so hot. Mere months after Prey's release, the entire service went down, and all users who owned copies of Prey had their keys migrated over to Steam, which would become the home of the game until it was later taken off sale for licensing reasons. And finally, the story behind the game is over, and now we can talk about the game itself. Prey is a survival horror first-person shooter. Wait, stop right there. I am debating that Wikipedia. Not the first-person shooter part, but the survival horror part? Without getting too caught up on specific genre definitions, Prey is an old-school-as-heck first-person shooter with an emphasis on crazy weapon variety and gravity-based level design. Sure, there are some scary parts woven in the mix, but it's hard to be spooked when playing a game that gives you this much raw firepower. Prey finds itself in a unique spot in terms of how it plays. Most shooters of this console generation were completely defined by either Call of Duty 4 or Gears of War, but Prey predates both of these experiences. It's one of the few shooters I can think of from the 7th generation of consoles without iron sights, or cover-based mechanics, or regenerating health. It has more in common with Doom or Quake than it does anything else you'd find on the 360, and that's also true of how it handles its weapon variety. Prey puts no restrictions on the amount of weapons you can carry at one time, meaning that your whole arsenal is at your disposal just by scrolling the mouse wheel. The 8 different weapons you unlock throughout the experience are generally alien-based reskins of traditional military equipment, but with a small twist. The basic rifle that you get relatively early on is going to be a gun that you keep coming back to, but the fact that there's no iron sights frees up your right mouse button for an alternate fire mode. In this case, a disgusting appendage detaches itself from the gun and plants itself on your eyes to make a makeshift scope, turning the weapon into a sniper rifle. Alternate modes of fire are something that each of the weapons in the game has, and most of them are as cool as the rifle. Some take it a step farther and don't have any real-world analogs. The leech gun is a personal favorite of mine. It needs to siphon its ammunition out of wells in the ground and walls. Depending on the properties of where you siphon it from, you get different effects. This means that sometimes the leech gun fires crackling bolts of electricity, sometimes it fires a freeze ray, and, if you're lucky, sometimes it fires a crazy powerful beam of energy that's so intense it pushes you back when you use it. In many ways it feels like the game was developed in the 90s, but not in the weird clunky way, but in a cool modern way. It takes the spirit of all the old games from which it derives inspiration, not necessarily all the baggage. Prey's combat is just fast, and the huge weapon pool to switch between and the lack of waiting behind cover both lend themselves to jumping around and constantly firing, and that's something that makes Prey unique among its peers. Another area where Prey feels unique is in its choice of protagonist. I can't think of many other games that open up on an Indian reservation, but behold! You play as Damasi Tawodi, or Tommy for short. He's a member of the Cherokee Nation working as a mechanic on the reservation, and he hates it. He's looking to get out and see the world, ditch the life he has here behind. The initial conflict is that he attempts to bring his girlfriend Jen with him, but Jen is much more attached to the life that they already have and insists on staying. And in a monkey's paw style of wish fulfillment, Tommy gets what he asks for. Within minutes of the game opening up, the Indian reservation gets uprooted and its inhabitants abducted by aliens. You get brought to their station where humans are being slaughtered and harvested for nutrients. After getting freed from your restraints, your goal is simple. Find your girlfriend and get off the station. The story takes some twists and turns from there, but nothing you won't see coming if you're a fan of science fiction.
Who are you?
You may call me Eluit.
Tommy's genealogy as a Cherokee warrior becomes important in one of the game's key mechanics, spirit walking. At the push of a button, Tommy can exit his body and move independently of it. This ability is used in both combat and puzzle solving. This form has its own weapon in the bow, whose ammunition can be increased by slaying enemies. You can also interact with the environment within this spirit form. Pulling levers and flipping switches simultaneous to leaving your body in a key location is the name of the game. Over the game's 5-hour campaign, the puzzles will never get too demanding, and that just might be one of Prey's only real faults. Once you've seen the first hour's worth of puzzles, you've really seen them all. Leave your physical body at a doorway that you can't pass through, go use your spirit form to press a button, and then continue on with your physical body. It's a cool change of pace at the least and helps ensure that the combat doesn't grow stale, but the puzzles are definitely the game's weaker half. Prey's other innovations come from portals and gravity. Like mentioned before, portals opening up into other areas of the map were one of the key roadblocks that the developers were struggling with in this game's earlier iterations. And thankfully, they finally got them working in the end product. You'd be forgiven if you took a look at these portals and claimed that the game was just a ripoff of Valve's Portal. But then you'd realize that Prey predated Portal by over a year. The biggest reason I wager that Prey doesn't get remembered for these cool gateways despite being first is that they aren't much integrated into the gameplay. For this game, they're really just cool doorways and nothing more, since the player can't directly interface with them or make their own like you can in Portal. Their inclusion is still cool, but the gravity play is definitely a more impactful gameplay change. Navigating through portals or interacting with specific switches will convert the gravity of the player. This can cause firefights to break out where the fighters have their boots planted on different floors entirely. You may be upside down or on a wall shooting at enemies on the ceiling. The awesomeness of this gets more pronounced when using some of the game's non-hit scan weapons, like grenade launchers, as the grenades fired will obey the gravity of the room and not the player. This causes some interactions like grenades falling up when exiting the barrel of a gun, which is kick-ass. Prey's greatest strength is how tight it all feels. It's unlikely you'll ever get bored while playing because the game's finished well before it wears out its welcome. Its fast-paced gameplay makes it refreshingly different from all other shooters of its time, the story is predictable but good fun, and the uniqueness of the Cherokee protagonist and the influences that has on the gameplay make for one cool package. Its mechanics may not exactly come together to make a great survival horror game, if that's even what they were going for, but they do come together to make a great alien butt-kicking adventure that will make you glad it didn't fall prey to development hell.